In February of 1959, 9 highly trained Soviet hikers set out into the northern Ural Mountains with a confidence built slowly over years of discipline, hardship, and proven competence. These were not impulsive adventurers seduced by danger, but young adults shaped by a culture that valued endurance, precision, and mental resilience. Their expedition was officially approved, their route carefully planned, their equipment inspected. In letters sent home and entries written along the trail, they described exhaustion without complaint, humor shared in bitter cold, and the quiet satisfaction of pushing their limits together. The tone of these writings is calm, even routine, revealing minds firmly anchored in structure and purpose. There is no trace of dread, no suggestion of tension within the group, no hint that morale was breaking. And that is precisely what makes what followed so deeply unsettling. Somewhere along that frozen slope, the internal order that governed their judgment collapsed entirely, as if the mountain did not simply overwhelm them physically, but reached inward and dismantled the very framework through which they understood danger, safety, and reason. The campsite marks the precise point where that collapse becomes visible. Their tent, their only defense against the lethal cold, was found partially flattened and violently torn open from the inside. The cuts were not accidental, nor the result of panic fumbling with a zipper. They were purposeful, rushed, and final, suggesting an urgency so extreme that preserving the shelter no longer mattered. Outside, the snow told a story that felt almost restrained, a line of footprints moving downhill, measured rather than frantic, as though the group left together under a shared decision. Some of those prints were made by bare feet, others by socks thin enough to offer no protection. Coats, boots, tools, and food were left behind. There was no sign that anyone attempted to return, no evidence of hesitation once the descent began. Whatever forced that choice did not allow time for debate or reconsideration. It overpowered instinct, training, and self-preservation in a matter of moments, compelling 9 rational people to step calmly into an environment they knew, with absolute certainty, would kill them. As search teams moved deeper into the frozen wilderness, each discovery stripped away the hope that a simple explanation might still exist. The first bodies were found near the edge of the forest, positioned in a way that suggested intention rather than collapse. Branches above them were broken high up, as if climbed in desperation, and the remains of a small fire lay between their frozen forms. Their hands were deeply burned, not accidentally singed, but damaged through prolonged contact with flame, as though pain no longer registered as a warning. Fingers were raw and fractured, evidence of frantic attempts to tear branches free with bare hands in temperatures that quickly steal strength and sensation. These were not the actions of people already resigned to death, but of individuals fighting to survive, long after they had fled the safety of the tent. Farther into a nearby ravine, the tone of the scene shifted from tragic to deeply unsettling. Several bodies were discovered buried beneath meters of snow, arranged in positions that suggested they had been moving together when something abruptly stopped them. Their injuries were severe and precise: crushed ribs, shattered bones, trauma comparable to a high-speed collision. Yet the skin showed no tearing, no bruising consistent with blunt impact against rocks or trees. The surrounding snow was undisturbed, the terrain unchanged, as if the force that destroyed their bodies passed through them alone. Searchers struggled to reconcile how such damage could occur in a place that bore no sign of struggle, collapse, or external violence. It was not just what was found that disturbed them, but what was absent. Efforts to reconstruct the final hours only deepened the confusion. The order in which the hikers died could not be cleanly established. Some appeared to have succumbed quickly, others lingered for hours, possibly moving between locations in the dark. Clothing had been redistributed, warmer garments taken from those already dead and worn by the living, implying moments of clarity and deliberate choice amid overwhelming conditions. Hypothermia accounted for certain behaviors, such as confusion and impaired judgment, but it failed to explain the initial flight or the severity of the injuries in the ravine. When it was noted that one victim was missing her tongue and others had lost their eyes, explanations pointed to natural decomposition and scavenging. Yet the specificity of the damage, and its absence in other areas, left a residue of doubt that no report could fully wash away. Each medical assessment felt incomplete, as though the truth was fragmented, scattered across the mountain, resisting any attempt to be assembled into a single coherent narrative. Environmental explanations followed in steady succession, each offering the promise of resolution before collapsing under its own inconsistencies. Avalanches were the first and most convenient answer, invoked to explain panic, injuries, and sudden evacuation. Yet the physical evidence resisted this narrative. There was no mass of displaced snow, no damage to the surrounding terrain, and no burial of the tent consistent with such an event. The footprints leading away from the campsite remained sharply defined, something an avalanche would have erased instantly. Other theories focused on sudden wind phenomena, extreme katabatic gusts capable of producing disorientation, or rapid pressure changes that might induce physical distress. Each factor, examined alone, seemed plausible. Taken together, they still failed to explain why 9 trained hikers would unanimously abandon shelter without gear, moving in formation rather than chaos, as if responding to a shared internal signal rather than an external attack. As physical causes faltered, attention shifted toward something far less tangible and far more unsettling: the possibility that the threat was perceived rather than present. Infrasound, produced when strong winds interact with certain mountain formations, has been shown to trigger intense anxiety, nausea, and a sense of impending doom without a recognizable source. Victims often report an unshakable certainty that something is wrong, even when reason offers no evidence. If such conditions formed that night, the hikers may have experienced a collective psychological assault, one that bypassed logic and spoke directly to instinct. In that state, remaining inside the tent may have felt unbearable, even lethal, while exposure to the cold seemed like a temporary risk by comparison. The danger they reacted to would not have been visible, audible, or measurable in any conventional way, making their decisions incomprehensible to those who arrived later. It is here that the Dyatlov Pass case shifts from a story about a hostile environment to one about the fragility of human cognition under sustained pressure. These hikers were not inexperienced, nor were they prone to hysteria. They were individuals pushed by isolation, fatigue, and cold into a narrow psychological corridor where perception outweighs reason. The mind, under such conditions, does not collapse in chaos. It recalibrates its priorities incorrectly. Fear becomes decisive. Doubt vanishes. Every second feels urgent. Every choice feels final. If you find yourself drawn to these moments where rational people are overtaken by forces they cannot name, subscribing to the channel and leaving a like helps keep these cases explored with depth rather than reduced to convenient explanations. What unfolded on that mountainside was not random madness, but a terrifyingly coherent response to a threat that existed only within the mind, and yet was powerful enough to lead 9 people, together, into the cold with no expectation of return. When the official investigation finally concluded, it did so with language that felt less like an answer and more like a retreat. The cause of death was attributed to an unknown compelling force, a phrase so broad it explained everything and nothing at once. Key documents were sealed without detailed justification, and for years the case remained suspended in administrative silence. When portions of the files were later released, they offered fragments rather than clarity. Reports contradicted earlier statements. Witness testimonies shifted subtly over time. Traces of radiation found on some clothing were acknowledged, then minimized, without a convincing explanation of their origin. Even the delay in mounting a full search raised quiet questions. None of these details alone proved negligence or deception, but together they created a pattern of unresolved gaps, as though finding a conclusion had never been the true priority. The mountain yielded no answers, and the institutions responsible for uncovering them seemed unwilling or unable to press further into uncertainty. What remains most disturbing is not the physical mechanism that ended the hikers' lives, but the invisible force that convinced them to abandon the very principles that had kept them alive until that moment. There was no sign of pursuit, no sound recorded, no frantic message scrawled in a notebook. There is only the evidence of a shared decision, made quickly and without dissent, to flee shelter, warmth, and equipment in favor of an environment they understood to be fatal. This was not confusion spread over hours, but a sudden alignment of belief that whatever was happening inside that tent was more dangerous than freezing to death outside it. If the human mind can be driven to such certainty without a visible enemy, without hysteria, without warning, then the Dyatlov Pass case leaves us with a far more unsettling question than any theory can answer. How thin is the boundary between rational survival and self-destruction, and would we recognize the moment it quietly gives way?